Every video game, whether it's solitaire or slots or God of War, all tell a story. Even the ones that don't have a story, like those first few I mentioned, are telling a story through the economic impact that they have on our world. Today we're going to be talking about Gamenomics and something that a lot of people have no idea even existed. These are the narratives of our lives. I'm Chad Garrett, and this is the Chad Garrett Show. So first and foremost, for the audience that doesn't play video games, why do you care about this? You care about this because economics has a direct impact on your life. So even if you don't care about video games at all, the idea in question that the gaming and economics of gaming has a direct impact on your life, your society, the things that are placed in your stores, and how all of this sort of works together is really important. And so I want to make sure that we cover this. And this entire episode was really begged on this one big question as to, now that everything in gaming is really going to download, how you have to download everything that you buy, why is the cost of video games not going down when the production cost of video games, simple economics here, if the cost of production is going down because you're not producing a physical copy of something, then why aren't the costs of this thing going down? And we're going to get into all of this. I'm going to try and paint this really big picture for you, and I hope that you guys are ready to enjoy. If you're a video game fan, this is going to be really cool. If you're not, stick with me because it has severe impacts on our culture today. And I'm going to highlight that very first and foremost with some statistics for you straight out of financesonline.com. So everything that I'm about to talk to you about as far as this goes, you can find for yourself, as well as some other really cool statistics if that's your game. But first, I want to encourage everyone to go over to forerunnerproductions.locals.com. We're creating a ton of great content over there. Forerunner Publications, our publishing arm, just brought on a new content creator, and we are so excited to be able to share his work with you. So now we have Bergen, we have Lillian, and we are bringing on another content creator, Zach. We are growing faster than what we know what to do with, and we need your help. We need your support. Without you, none of this happens. None of this works. So go to forerunnerproductions.locals.com, become a supporter, get access to posting, get access to all of our exclusive content, and make sure that you are ready for the journey to come because we are not slowing down. This train is only rolling faster. Okay. So in the year 2000, the video game industry was worth about $7 billion. And this was mainly driven by the industry of gambling, right? So online gambling games where they were harnessing the internet to bring Vegas to you. That's how almost everyone was playing video games. And at this point in time, the common gamer was actually 70% female. Females actually were online gambling more than men were. Fast forward a little bit to 2004, 2005, where the height period of PlayStation 2 starts to take over, and you get this shift in the gaming industry away from these tiddlywink online games like addictinggames.com and miniclipgame.com and these other video game sites that are doing this gambling thing, and you actually get people paying attention to big video game industries that have been growing since the 80s. And that takes us way, way back to arcades and the development of the NES and the SNES, and that's a whole different topic as to the history of how the video game industry came to be. What you need to know is that in 2000, the video game industry as a whole was worth about $7 billion. Not an insignificant amount of money, but on the world scale, not really that impactful. However, in the year 2020, the video game industry is now worth, this number is kind of baffling to me. The video game industry has grown 27 times its size in less than 20 years. In the year 2000, it was worth $7 billion. In the year 2020, The gaming industry is estimated to be worth $189.3 billion. And it ain't just gambling anymore. If you know anything, you know that video games take up a massive amount of the entertainment market, whether it be from console gaming or PC gaming. Phone games are huge now. And there's some interesting demographics to that as well, where female gamers were predominantly online in the 2000s doing gambling and stuff. It is now 70% of the mobile gaming market is actually female. So the Candy Crush sagas and a lot of the other mobile games that you have in the mobile solitaires, most of that is actually driven by female gamers. However, the console gaming, the PC gaming, the story-driven big publisher, what we call AAA games, are driven mostly by men, or they were. Starting in the year 2000, I'm taking everything from the year 2000 because 20 years is a good chance to track all of this. This is really how this thing has grown. In the year 2000, the gaming market, from the year 2000 to about the year 2012, so for about a 12-year period, the number of female gamers fluctuated somewhere between 40% and 46%. So we'll average it out at like 43, 44% of the gaming market. So not an insignificant amount of women were playing games, but they were far outstriped by the amount of men that were in the games. And a lot of that has to do with how the video game industry was marketing to men. A lot of that has to do with some of the fan service that was put into games, which is a really bad trope for games. And I'm glad that we're finally getting out of that. But it also has to do with the fact that games are hyper-violent and men have a higher tendency to violence. In my episode, Men, Masculinity, and Warfare, we talk a little bit about this. So go back and give that a listen if you want more on that. In the year 2020, though, the gaming industry is split almost 50-50. Almost. It is wild to see how from 2012, in just 8 years, because of the different marketing tactics and how the video game industry has grown, they have been able to garner a much larger portion of population. It's also interesting to see how our culture has shifted. And now it is not just boys that grow up playing video games that never sort of grow out of it. I know that I still play a lot of video games, and I do that because it is really my favorite childhood pastime. And there is an element of each of us that needs to cling on to something from our childhood because it was indicative on how we grew up. Our brains are maturing, our bodies are maturing, and everything has a really significant impact. And a lot of those things are programmed into who we are. And going back to those things, remembering a purer time. For me, it's Kingdom Hearts. And thinking back on the ideas and motifs of friendship and loyalty and the willingness to do good and stand up against darkness makes a huge impact. It very much forms who I am today. And I think that a lot of people cling to that for different reasons. There's reasons why people play Call of Duty still to this day. There's been a massive fluctuation in that market and in the Call of Duty video game series. And yet people still return to it almost religiously because it's the next one in the series and because they grew up on it and they're trying to capture something and experience something that they know that's comfortable to them and that their childhood is identified with. It allows them to sort of capture and keep that. But the video game industry isn't just growing. It is almost completely supporting national economies at this point. And I'm going to use Poland as an example. It's like, really? Poland of all places? Yes, Poland of all places. There was a Polish author that wrote a book series that is commonly known as the Witcher series. It is now a major TV series on Netflix. It has been a major video game series for years, and the video game company that made the Witcher video games based on the books, loosely based on the books, same characters, different storylines, is known as CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red has now had their industry take over the largest bank. Their stock is worth more than the largest bank in Poland. Coming to you, it's actually almost 2% larger. It's 1.53% larger than the largest bank in Poland. And that doesn't sound like a significant amount, but when you're talking about stocks and stock increases, when you're talking about how much stocks are worth, when you get a 1.5% increase in something over a day, you're cheering because you might have just made $30,000 depending how much money you have invested. So coming from tweaktown.com, this is Derek Strickland reporting, CD Projekt Red's current market capitalization sits at 27.6 billion zloty, that's 6.63 billion US dollars, exceeding the market cap of Poland's largest bank, PKO Bank Polski, by 300 million zloty. At this time of writing, PKO Bank Polski's market cap sits at 27.3 billion zloty, which is $6.53 billion. That's a huge difference. That is in the stock market, that is an absolutely massive difference. And if you are bigger than your country's largest bank, maybe not your country's largest corporation, but your country's largest bank, that is insane. A video game company has that much economic impact on a whole country. Now, in the United States, it's not nearly to that degree, or so we think. I remember in the founding days of Facebook, the reason why people got onto Facebook so often was to play these really crappy online games. Zynga was doing the poker thing, and then there was this mafia game that you could go and play that had these countdown timers, and you would run missions and collecting. And it was like most of it was just text and clicking buttons and stuff. And it was really rudimentary, but that was how Facebook got started. It was a place for college kids to meet up and do stuff, and for young middle schoolers like I was when it first came out. We got onto Facebook to play games because it was a safe place for us to play games. It was more or less controlled. There wasn't a lot of traffic on there yet, and there is still a really big market for games on Facebook. Apple has Apple Gaming now. Anyone that has a smartphone knows that the video game market on mobile phones is huge. And every time that you walk into a superstore of some type during the holiday season, the thing that is always on the shelves, that is always being promoted on TV and everywhere else, on billboards slapped everywhere, is the latest console and the biggest AAA game, typically a Call of Duty or an Assassin's Creed or something of that nature. This industry has now seeped through every bit of our society. And I want to talk about the cost of gaming as something that is near and dear to my heart. I want to talk about why the price of games doesn't bother me. There's been this whole big thing about GameStop's stock coming out, and I want to explain a little bit about the rise and fall of GameStop to you, because they play a huge part in this narrative that we're talking about here. But it really starts in 2005. This whole story starts in 2005. In 2005, there was a minor loophole found in the legal discourse and the business law of the world that essentially got tax exemptions, a certain amount of tax exemptions for pricing a video game at a cap of $59.99. So not only was that sort of the cost that it would take to be profitable for making a game, but more so it was the most that they could charge and people could really be expected to pay without jumping into a new sort of tax bracket for that company. I'm not an economist. I don't really know how all of that legality works. All I know is that there was an incentive for not going to $60 flat, for going to $59.99. And for the past 15 years, this cost hasn't changed. Now, anyone that knows anything about economics knows that inflation sucks. And if you haven't changed the cost of your games for 15 years, inflation has kept moving, which means that you are making less and less money for the games that you're making. This is what led to the rise of DLC in 2010, 2012, and a lot of people felt copped out by DLC. You would purchase a game, and then a few months later, a year later, there would be another extension to this game that would come out, and you would pay another $10, and you would get this extension of the game, and you could download it and be able to play it on. Well, it got to a point where in 2013, 2014, DLC started releasing almost the same time as the game. So you would purchase the game and you would have the majority of the game available to play, but there were segments of the game that were considered launch day DLC, which means that they had been produced the exact same time as the game. They were meant to go with the original game, and the developers decided to withhold it away from gamers and make them pay extra to try and get an extra buck. Now, from a development perspective, I get it. You have to do these types of things. You have to use these tactics in order to make this stuff work, in order to be able to pay for the people that are actually making your games. However, there's a secondary point of this, because in this time period, this is also the rise and height of GameStop. So GameStop starts rising up around the same time, and the way that GameStop really made their money was not by selling games in the retail fashion, how Walmart, Target, you name it, Sam's Club, I don't care, how all of these people make their money by selling games, where they get an influx of game. They purchase a game from a game developer, and then they do a slight upcharge, and then they sell all their games. If the game isn't selling, there's a buyback policy. It's the same thing that happens with books. And so GameStop did this thing where they took this sort of thrift store pawn shop idea, and they did it with video games. So if you have a game that you've played, but you don't really want it anymore, you can take it to GameStop and you can trade it in, and they'll give you pittance, right? They'll give you cents on the dollar for what that game's actually worth. But that game will go to credit that you can use to buy the next game that you really, really want. That game that you just sold to GameStop, they make sure that it works, they package it all nice, and then they put it back on the shelves. That way someone that hasn't played it can come in and get it. For $10, $12, they might have given it to you, given you $3 or $4 for this game, and then they're selling it for almost the cost of what it takes to get it from the actual publisher at this point. This is where you come into an issue. All of the used game sales that GameStop was making went directly to the retailer GameStop. Not a dime of it was shared with the guys that actually made the game, or the girls that actually made the game. Which means that every time we, as consumers, bought a used product, the people that made that product, the people that we want to continue to make great games for us, they don't get a dime. How can a company expect to stay in business if they are not getting a single dime for the games they're making? This is why they were forced to do this launch day DLC thing. This is the rise of DLC, and then the launch day DLC. It was a way of them being able to squeeze games for a low production cost for a little bit more money so that they can make the next games. They can make the next project. Now, with the growth of the industry, it's obvious that they weren't hurting too bad, but it is very obvious during the lull period of 2014 to about 2018, about this 4-year period in gaming where we had a bunch of bad stuff happening, and I want to get to that. We're gonna talk about that here in just a second. Once again, I want to thank all of you guys for being here and doing this show with me. This is one of the coolest episodes because this is a narrative that not many other people are going to talk about. If you go and you listen to gaming style podcasts, I love IGN's Game Scoop. Game Informer has a podcast too. Game Scoop is where I really find my pride and joy, but they're all focused on like what's happening in the gaming industry today. And every now and then you'll get them off on a tangent talking about an aside of what it was like to get to this point. But no one really talks about this narrative that has shaped our economy, this narrative that has shaped our lives. And the fact that you have taken this ride with me and you're still here makes me so thankful. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much. Please support us. 4rproductions.locals.com. Shameless plug. We need it. We need every bit of it. It's how we keep making stuff like this for you. It's how we get all of this wonderful equipment and the setup and etc. And we need to keep doing it so that we can make a difference in our culture and we can keep great games, great stories, the best stories that have ever been told coming to you. Okay, 2014. We are in this period where the gaming industry has lulled. They're doing launch day DLC, which is something that we saw in almost every game that was coming out at this particular point in time. You also see the rise of microtransactions. Now, microtransactions come from the mobile gaming world. So when you have developers, especially EA, Electronic Arts, it was really, really successful with making sports games. They got into making games. They bought out BioWare. They started getting into making Mass Effect and the Dragon Age games as well. And you see this trend where they're losing cash flow to GameStop. Now, 15, 16-year-old me doesn't have any knowledge, doesn't have any idea, doesn't know anything, right? And I'm encouraged by my parents and by everyone to, buy the used game, save your money, be fiscally and financially smart. This, from a capitalism perspective, like save your money, do what you got to do. Middle class, lower middle class, like definitely, like save your cash, figure out a way to get what you want for the cheapest possible price. Except for the fact that when you rob all of the money from the people that are making the art that you love, because video games are artwork. They're not just a distraction. They're not just this arbitrary thing. They are just as important to our culture and our society today as books have been for the entire span of time, as movies have been for the entire span of since the 1930s, right? They tell a central part of our culture. The things that are talked about, the way that these games are made, the stories that they convey are central, and they tell the story of the time that we live in. So many games, everything from Portal with The Cake is a Lie to Mass Effect, Kingdom Hearts, God, the list goes on. Even the hyper-violent ones like Doom, they have something to say about where we are in our society and the core of our society, because these things that are successful speak to the people that are purchasing them. If a game is a blockbuster game and it has nothing but hyper-violence, or it has some really horrible elements to it, it says something about your society. Also, when a game flounders and falls, like Outlast 2, where it has like a legitimate oral rape scene in it, sorry if that gets a little bit graphic for some of you, it didn't perform very well. It didn't, and that says a good thing about our society, but it's not always like that. Personally, the original God of War games saw a lot of success, and as a kid, I wondered why. I didn't really get it. And I know that there are a lot of people that love the God of War games and this idea of this tragic character that is just filled with rage. There are elements of it that I get, but there are also elements of it that I don't get. I love the newer God of War because I think that Kratos is far more human in it. And even because there needs to be a human element. We can't just be talking about gods that want to go around and butcher everything. It's one of the great things about myth and mythos is that these gods have human elements to them that we can identify with. And the original God of War games lacked that for me. But nevertheless, it says something about our culture and our society that those games were so popular and so successful. These companies need to find a way to continue to make these things that we love, to continue to make this art that we love. And the way that they do that is they try to milk us for cash. And we say, oh, these evil cash mongering. Well, yeah, but at the same time, like, you have to be able to pay your artist for the artwork that they're giving you. You're not going to the artist that you want to pay for custom artwork is going to be at cost or more expensive than what you pay for something that you go and buy it at home, right? It's the same concept. If you're not giving the artist any money to do the commissioned artwork, they have to increase their cost because they have to find some way to stay in business. However, if you give them more business, the cost goes down because they're able to do more until they can't handle the workflow anymore, and then the cost goes up because they're trying to limit workflow. Economics, yay! We see in 2014 especially the rise of microtransactions, which have been very popular in mobile gaming, where you buy a loot crate or this loot box thing for $1, $2, something like that, and it gives you some type of element that helps you in the game. Clash of Clans is a really great example of this. A lot of people played Clash of Clans. It was a point where it became, not long after its release, actually, where it became pay to win, where you had to pay money to make sure that you were the first person or the first group of people to get the maxed out newest character. That way you could put him on your team, and that way you wouldn't lose all of your kingdom and have to start from scratch whenever you got obliterated. They brought this element into video games, both in Mass Effect, though it wasn't nearly as impactful. They definitely brought it into Middle-earth, Shadow of War, and a lot of other games as well. These are just the two that come off the top of my head. And this, for the majority of console gamers and PC gamers, this did not sit well. And a lot of people started actually pulling their support from these games, and these games started getting really, really terrible reviews because these systems were so busted, and many of them in the games that they were used in were very much used as a pay-to-win thing. You had to spend your cash if you wanted to win the game, or if you wanted to beat the game, or if you wanted the full experience of the game, versus being able to go to a store, pick a game up off the shelf, and plug it into your game and play it. Which brings me to my next point. Once they graduated out of the pay-to-win microtransaction market, the gaming industry realized that they needed to do something else. And the thing that they decided to do is they were going to cut production cost. It was around this same time, and with the success of downloadable content, big packages like gigabytes, 40, 50 gigabytes of downloads that people had to have. For these expansions, you begin to see the arrival of licenses and the online market. And that's where we are today in very many cases. We're at a point now where even if you do go and buy a physical copy from a retailer, the physical game is not on that disc. The only thing that is on that disc is a license, and that license gives you access to download a game from the company server, which is why these games take so long, even when you buy a disc, to download and update and day one patch and all of these things. It's because the game isn't actually on the disc. The game is something that you're downloading. The thing that's on the disc is a license. So cool that you have a memorabilia piece, but the reality is that there's no difference now between buying a physical copy, which is why there aren't as many physical copies being sold, and buying online, which is what people are doing increasingly. Now, this is where the question from a friend of mine comes up, where he said, I'm really upset that the game cost is the same. It's still $60 to download a game online as it is for me to go and purchase the game at the store, because there's no plastic packaging and the artwork on the cover doesn't have to be all formatted and the disc itself doesn't have to be formatted and the game's not on the disc. Let's go back. The cost of gaming hasn't increased from $60 since 2005, which means inflation has occurred. So now by cutting cost and doing the thing that you wanted them to do, not having these microtransactions and not having this unlimited amount of DLC that has bits and pieces of the game that really robs you of the experience, of the whole experience, in order to give you all of the things that you want, they had to do something. And so now they're cutting production cost, keeping the games the same, and by doing this, by having the license on the disc and not the game on the disc, they now shoot GameStop in the foot. This now forces people, the developer, at any point in time, whenever a game is purchased through Steam. Steam is a great platform where even when Steam is running a discount on games, the developer is getting the cost of that game, right? There is an element of money that comes from Steam that goes to the developer to give them money for the license of the game that you just purchased, even if you get it for $2. There are people that are making money that is fueling an economic boon so that people have jobs, so that they can make this really awesome art. And the only way that that keeps going is if these companies do these smart things. Keep the cost the same. Make it cheaper for them to produce it. That way they keep more of the profits. That way the dude that's doing the 3D modeling has a job. The guy that's writing the story has a job. The people that are voice acting have a job. The people that are doing writing have a job. The people that are making the gameplay loop, because the way that games work is they get you hooked into playing the game by having a consistent loop of gameplay. Do this task, do this task, do this task. Fighting games. have a loop to the fight. RPG games have some type of loop element that you get that is cyclical, that you get better at as you go. The reason why it's a loop is because it wants you to get better at the game as you play, which is what allows the game to get harder as you go. All of this is just one side of the video game industry, which is exploding. Okay, I don't think that the video game industry is too far off from being the next Hollywood. It is going to be the thing in the place that people experience story and art, and where we create the next myth, or we experience the next myth in our society, because it's interactive. The fact that you can sit down and watch a movie and experience a great story and identify with the themes and motifs to it is great, but there's also an element of movies and Hollywood that you sort of check out after a certain amount of time, or you might miss something important because you're not paying attention, it's not shot well, or it doesn't particularly speak to you. With video games, when the controller is in your hand, you are stepping into the shoes of that character, whoever they are. If you're leading an army, you're the commander. If you're experiencing a specific character storyline, like Sora in Kingdom Hearts, or Kratos in God of War, or Ellie in The Last of Us, all of these things have a profound impact on who we are, because it's not just someone else that we are witnessing something happen to. In a way, it becomes us. We're controlling the actions. We're the ones that have to go through and survive the zombie apocalypse. We're the ones that have to save the people. And that means that certain elements of story we take personally in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to, which allows us to experience something deeper than what a movie can give us. Because though we might experience sympathy or even empathy with a character, it's not happening to us. Versus in a game, it kind of is. Now, there's an entire competitive market for video games. We're talking League of Legends, Apex Legends, the competitive Call of Duty scene. The biggest one for esports is League of Legends. League of Legends came onto the scene in 2008, I want to say. Maybe it was 2010, something around there. And it has become the largest esport in the world, to the point where they are selling out stadiums for the world championships. Millions of dollars are being put out in cash prizes every year. And the facilities have gone from these teams staying at someone's house to being able to, and that house being a gamer's den, and the team practicing there, to where there are full on facilities with trainers and physicians to make sure that these guys are fueled up, ready to go, hydrated, that they're the carpal tunnel and all the things in their fingers. It's like a real sport now, which is so weird, because when we think sport, we think that something is all physically active, and yet these games, it's difficult for people that may have never played them. They tax your brain in a way that even like NFL quarterbacks don't get taxed. The way that you have to process information and how often you have to train for these things. And honestly, the physical rigor of having to sit in front of a computer for the long hours every day to train to be good at these things has a significant toll. And to see society shift in a way that kind of redefines what it means to be an athlete is interesting. Now, put these guys up against an NFL linebacker? No way in heck. Put them up against a hacker? They might actually stand a chance. Because these two realms are very similar. A lot of our sports, a lot of the things that we prize in our sports, are outlets for physicality that were oftentimes used in warfare, that then needed an outlet when warfare was not being fought. Especially things like football, even soccer in a certain way. People that are meant for running long distances and traversing long pieces of ground. They're used to express some element of physicality. The new battleground for much of our society is in the digital sphere, which means that the athletes now, the ones that are representing these sort of tactile skills that are necessary to be good at cyber warfare in many ways, are the ones that are going to be the gamers. And this sounds all hullabaloo, big, right? Ready Player One status. I think it's closer than what we might assume. I think it's much closer to the truth than what we might assume. And I think that the narrative is going to continue to morph. We are once again entering into a high period of gaming with everything technology-based that is happening, the companies that have been sort of silent over the past few years really focusing on developing some really big games, as well as seeing how well performed lower-powered systems like the Switch are, and how beautiful the games like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild can be, and how little it takes to actually run that, but how captivating that world can be and how much fun it can be to play that. I don't think that this is going anywhere. And I honestly think that from a conservative perspective, we talk all the time about getting into the culture fight, making a difference in Hollywood, telling the best stories that have ever been told. Well, if we choose to ignore the gaming market, we are doing a disservice not only to ourselves, but to our children. Because these are going to be the stories and the things that shape their future and their childhood in the very same way that it shaped mine, but to a higher degree. A much, much higher degree, because technology is so much more integrated into our societies now. It would be idiotic for us to ignore this place of fight. So for those of you that don't play video games, that don't really resonate with this is why it matters. It matters because this is a new battleground, and it is a fresh enough battleground to where there is still possibilities for people who have the values that we care about to get into the fight and to make stories and to make games that matter and that instill good values, amazing virtues, and make great art. Make something that captures the soul of our society. That's Gamenomics for you guys. That is a very short, brief, and as concise as I could make it, overview of all of this. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. Make sure to head over to forerunnerproductions.locals.com for a ton of more content, exclusive content. We do Sundays are for the Sins and Meme Monday and all of the great things. And we're having a great conversation over there. It is the way that you guys support content like us, like us, that allow us to get into Hollywood, that allow us to get into the video game industry, right? We would love to do that, but we need your support in order to do it. We don't just want to talk about it. We've proposed the solution, but we also want to be able to take the solution and run with it. We want to be in every aspect of the fight, but in order to do so, we need your help. So head on over to forerunnerproductions.locals.com. Make sure that you become a supporter, enjoy the conversation. Also, check out our other shows. We have our evangelical show, The Shelter Hole. We have our interview-based show, Impetus Minds of the Driven, and our conversation-based show, The West Meadow Show. And the most recent episode of that has been kind of wild. We had some of the women of Forerunner take over and started doing weird talks about water dinosaurs and all sorts of other things. So make sure that you go and check out that episode. It's a good time. They actually cover some really cool topics, and I think that everyone can get something out of it. Until next time, when we are able to see you here on the Chad Garrett Show, I'm Chad Garrett. We're out.